the morning my grandfather died. My brother didn't even come to the hospital. I was the one who got the call at 2 in the morning. I was the one who drove 40 minutes through empty Texas highways to get to the medical center in San Antonio, while the rest of the family was still asleep. I sat with Grandpa Lou in that room that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, holding his hand while the monitors beeped slower and slower, and I talked to him. I told him about the garden he always said he wanted to finish. I told him his dogs were going to be fine. I told him I loved him, and I meant every word of it. My brother Cliff got there 20 minutes after Grandpa was already gone. He showed up in a pressed shirt, smelling like his expensive cologne, and the first thing he said wasn't about Grandpa. He looked at me, puffy-eyed, still in the oversized sweatshirt I'd grabbed off my bedroom floor, and said, "You look terrible. Go fix yourself before the nurses see you like that." That was my introduction to the week that changed everything. I should back up. My name is Leona, and I'm 32 years old. I work as a landscape architect for a firm in Austin, which means I spend most of my days thinking about how spaces can feel like home. There's an irony in that I've spent years designing places where people feel safe and welcome, while spending every holiday driving back to a family home where I never quite felt either of those things. My grandfather, Louis Hargrove, everyone called him Lou, was the exception. He was the one person in that whole family who ever made me feel like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. He'd built the family's construction business from nothing in the 70s, started with one truck and a handshake reputation in Bexar County, and by the time I was born, it had grown into something real. Not flashy, not Fortune 500, but solid. The kind of business where people in 3 counties knew the name and trusted it. Grandpa Lou loved that business the way some men love their children. He also loved me, his youngest grandchild, in a way I didn't fully understand until it was almost too late. My father passed when I was 11. Car accident on I-10. Nothing dramatic. Just a wet road and a moment of bad luck. After that, Grandpa Lou became the center of gravity in my life. He taught me how to read blueprints at his kitchen table. He drove me to my college orientation because my mother was working. He was the one who told me, when I got the landscape architecture offer after grad school, that I should take it even though it meant moving to Austin instead of staying close to home. "Go," he said. "You're the one in this family who knows how to build something worth keeping." I didn't know what he meant at the time. My brother Cliff is 6 years older than me, and has worked in Grandpa's business his whole adult life. Technically, I say, technically because Cliff has always been better at being present in the business than actually running it. He's good at lunches, good at schmoozing with county commissioners, good at showing up to ribbon cuttings in a truck, with the company logo on the door, the actual work, the bids, the crews, the logistics, the relationship with suppliers. Most of that ran through a project manager named Pete, who'd been with Grandpa Lou for 23 years. Cliff's wife, Tammy, was the one who really ran the show in their household, and by extension she had opinions about everything in the family, including me. Tammy had decided early on that I was a problem. Too independent, too educated in a way that made her nervous, too close to Grandpa Lou in a way she couldn't fully control or understand. So I kept my visits warm but brief. I showed up for Thanksgiving, for Grandpa's birthday in March, for the occasional Sunday dinner. I was cordial, I kept the peace. And when Grandpa's health started slipping in January, I drove down twice a month to sit with him, bring him tamales from the place he loved on Blanco Road, and just be there. Cliff came when Tammy reminded him to. The week after Grandpa died, the family gathered at his house in the hill country for what my aunt on my mother's side called a remembrance week. It was really just the logistics of grief. Sorting through belongings, meeting with the funeral home, receiving visitors who came to pay respects. The house was full of people I hadn't seen in years and a few I'd never met, extended family and business associates and neighbors from the road. Grandpa had lived on for 40 years. The night before the funeral, we had dinner at the house. Long table in the dining room, mismatched chairs pulled in from every corner, casseroles and potato salads, brought by neighbors, covering every inch of the kitchen counters. It felt like Thanksgiving except heavier. I was sitting near the end of the table, talking to my cousin Vera about Grandpa's garden, when Cliff stood up to make a toast. He had a glass of bourbon and that particular look on his face, the one where he's performing confidence, not actually feeling it. He talked about Grandpa's legacy. He talked about the business and what it meant to the community. He talked about family and continuity and how some of us have dedicated our lives to making sure what Dad built keeps going. The way he said some of us came with exactly the kind of pause that made everyone at the table understand he was drawing a line. Then my Aunt Bev, Grandpa's sister, called out from across the table. "What about Leona?" Surely he had something to say about her. Cliff looked at me. He had a small smile on his face that I recognized from childhood, the one that meant he was about to say something designed to land softly enough to deny later. "Leona's done great for herself," he said. "Grandpa was proud of her plants and whatever. But she wasn't here, Bev. That's just the truth. Some people prioritize their career. That's fine. But the business, the house, all of it, that's going to the people who showed up. There was a silence at the table. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else picked up their fork. I looked at my plate. My face felt hot. I thought about the 40-minute drives in the dark. I thought about the tamales going cold in the passenger seat because I'd hit traffic. I thought about every Sunday afternoon I'd sat on Grandpa's porch while he told me about the early days of the business and why he'd made the choices he'd made. I folded my napkin. I set it next to my plate. I pushed back my chair and said, "Excuse me," very quietly, and I walked outside to the back porch. I stood there for a while looking at Grandpa's garden. Overgrown at the edges the way it had been since his knees got bad, but still full of the roses he'd planted for my grandmother before she passed. I was trying to decide whether to cry or drive back to Austin that night when I heard the front doorbell ring. Through the window I saw a woman I didn't recognize. She was maybe 60 in a dark blazer, carrying a leather portfolio. She had the kind of calm that people in certain professions carry with them the way other people carry stress. She asked for Clifford Hargrove. She asked for me. Her name was Judith Almendarez, and she was a partner at an estate law firm in San Antonio. She said she'd been representing Louis Hargrove for the past 11 years, and that she had documents that needed to be reviewed with the family. Cliff invited her into Grandpa's study with the kind of gracious host performance he was good at. Tammy followed without being asked. A few other relatives drifted toward the doorway. I came in last and stood near the bookshelf, where Grandpa kept his old project binders. I knew those binders. I'd spent hours as a kid flipping through them, looking at blueprints and site photos, and the before and after. Pictures of buildings that had started as empty lots. Judith opened her portfolio and explained that Louis Hargrove had established a revocable living trust in 2014 that had converted to an irrevocable trust upon his death. She said it clearly and without editorializing, the way people do when they want the facts to land, without interference. Cliff nodded along like he already knew all of this. He had the body language of a man who expected good news. Judith continued. The trust designated the primary beneficiary of the Hargrove family home and the 42 acres of hill country land attached to it as Leona Marie Hargrove. The room went very quiet. Cliff's expression didn't collapse all at once. It sort of rearranged itself. The confidence first, then the smile, then finally the color in his face. That can't be right, Tammy said. She said it so fast it was almost like she'd been ready to say it. Judith looked at her without expression. The trust documents are quite clear. Would you like to review them? There must be a mistake, Cliff said. Or, there must be a more recent document. He told me. He said the house was. Your grandfather last amended this trust in March of this year, Judith said. The language is unambiguous. The property transfers to Leona Hargrove. The business interests are handled separately. Those are split, with certain conditions attached, between you and your sister. I heard the words, but they felt like they were coming from the wrong direction, like sounds underwater. I gripped the bookshelf behind me. Cliff turned to look at me. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I think about it a lot. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't satisfaction, not exactly. It was something closer to grief, layered on top of grief, because all I could think was that Grandpa Lou had known something none of us had said out loud. He'd known, and he'd done something about it quietly, 11 years ago, and then again just months before he died. Leona, Cliff said. His voice had a different quality now. You had to have known about this. I didn't, I said. He wouldn't do this without telling you. You had to. You were always over here, always. Cliff. I looked at my brother. I was tired. I was so tired, and Grandpa had been dead for less than a week, and I had driven 40 minutes through dark highways to be with him when he went, and I had folded my napkin 20 minutes ago, and walked outside, because I didn't want to make a scene at his table. I didn't know. Judith interjected calmly. She explained that an irrevocable trust is not a document that can be contested on the basis of surprise or expectation. She explained the timeline. She answered questions from my Aunt Bev, and from Cliff's cousin on his father's side with the same patient clarity. Cliff stopped talking, at some point. He just stood there. Tammy took his arm and steered him toward the door. Before he left the study, Cliff turned around one more time. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "You were always his favorite. I just never thought he'd actually do something about it." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. What came after was not a movie. I want to be clear about that, because in movies there's a clean ending, where the villain apologizes and the family heals, and everyone sits around a table together at Christmas, 2 years later, having learned something. Real life is messier and slower, and has a lot more text messages left on read. Cliff hired an attorney of his own. The attorney sent a letter suggesting that Grandpa Lou had not been of sound mind when he amended the trust in March. This was, and I say this as carefully as I can, not supported by anyone who had spent time with Grandpa Lou in March. Not Pete the project manager. Not Grandpa's doctor. Not my Aunt Bev, who'd visited him twice that month and described him as sharper than she'd seen him in years. Judith had anticipated this. She sent me a copy of a recorded video, something Grandpa had made with her firms the same day he signed the March Amendment. He sat in a chair in her conference room and spoke clearly about his intentions, his reasoning, and his full understanding of what he was signing. He mentioned Cliff by name. He mentioned me by name. He said, "I love my grandson, but I've watched him for 30 years, and I know what he'll do with that land if I leave it to him. He'll sell it in 18 months and split the money with Tammy's mother. Leona will keep it. She knows what things are worth keeping." I watched that video 3 times. I cried each time, not because of the house or the land, but because of how he said my name. Just the way he said it, like it was a settled thing, like he'd made peace with his decision a long time ago and it had cost him something to make it and he'd done it anyway. The attorney's challenge went nowhere. Irrevocable trusts established with proper documentation and witnessed signing, and a same-day capacity video, are remarkably difficult to contest as it turns out. Cliff's lawyer sent one more letter and then went quiet. The business situation was more complicated, and I want to be honest about that too. Grandpa's construction business was left with conditions. Cliff would continue running day-to-day operations. He'd been doing it in title if not always in practice, but the ownership structure changed. Cliff received 51%. I received 49%. Neither of us could sell our stake without the other's consent for a period of 10 years. Cliff did not take this well. He called me the week after Judith's visit and told me that I had no right to any part of that business, that I hadn't worked a day in it, that Grandpa had obviously been confused, that the whole thing was a setup and he was going to find a way to undo it. I listened to all of it. I let him talk. When he was done, I said, "I don't want to fight with you. I'm not going to interfere in how you run the business. Pete knows what he's doing, and so do you when you actually apply yourself. I just want you to know I'm not going anywhere." There was a long pause. "Why did he do this?" Cliff asked. He sounded genuinely confused, and underneath the anger there was something else. Something younger and more wounded. For a second, I could hear the 12-year-old boy who had been the man of the house too early and had never quite figured out how to stop performing that role. "I think he wanted to make sure you couldn't make decisions you'd regret," I said. "I think he trusted you more than he trusted you alone." Cliff hung up. I moved into Grandpa's house 6 months later. Not because I had to. Not even because it made financial sense in the obvious way, though Austin rent is not something anyone should have to pay indefinitely. I moved in because I drove out there on a Saturday in October to walk the property and think about what to do with it, and I stood in the garden for 40 minutes and I didn't want to leave. Grandpa's dogs, 2 ancient labs named Biscuit and Earl, had been staying with Pete's family. I brought them home that same day. They went straight to the rug in the living room and lay down like they'd never left. I kept his project binders on the bookshelf. I replanted the section of the rose garden that had gone leggy and overgrown. I fixed the fence on the east side of the property that he'd been meaning to repair for 2 years. I found a note he'd left for me in the center drawer of his desk. He'd written it by hand, which was unusual for him. He was a typed memo man all his life. It said, "Leona, the house is built for someone who's going to stay in it. I always knew that was you. Don't let anyone talk you out of anything that's already yours. Love, Grandpa Lou." I framed it. It's hanging in the hallway now, between 2 of his old site photos. My mother calls me every Sunday. She lives in San Antonio and she's cautious about the whole situation in the way she's cautious about most things. She doesn't want to take sides. She doesn't want to make things worse with Cliff. She loves both of us and doesn't entirely know what to do with that. But she comes out to the house once a month now, and she sits on the porch with me and drinks coffee, and last month she told me she was glad it went the way it did. "He always said you were the one who'd know what to do with it," she told me. "He said that to you?" "He said that to anyone who'd listen." She smiled. "You just weren't around to hear it. Cliff and I are not close. We text about business things when we have to. We were in the same room at Thanksgiving and we were polite and the food was good and nobody said anything about any of it. That's probably the best I can hope for right now, and I've made a kind of peace with that. Some damage takes longer than 1 season to repair. Some damage you just learn to work around. The way you'd work around a tree that's grown crooked. You don't cut it down. You just plan your garden to accommodate it. I think about Grandpa Lou a lot. Especially in the evenings when I'm in the garden, and the light goes golden, and the dogs are lying in the grass. I think about what it means that he made that decision, 11 years ago, quietly, without telling me, and then again in March, just months before he died. He'd been thinking about this for over a decade. He'd been watching and deciding and keeping his own counsel. He believed in me before I had fully believed in myself. He put that in legal documents. He made it irrevocable. I don't know if I'll ever build something as solid as what he built. I think about that sometimes. The gap between the generation that built things with their hands and the generations that came after. trying to figure out what we're supposed to leave behind. What counts? What holds? But I know this. I wake up every morning in the house he built, and I take care of the land he loved, and I work at a job that is fundamentally about making places feel like they mean something. That feels like enough. That feels like exactly what he intended. Biscuit is asleep on the porch behind me right now, and the roses are blooming early this year, and Grandpa Lou's note is still hanging in the hallway where I put it. And I think some days that is the whole story, and all the ending it needs.